praying and asking Jesus to heal your dad of cancer. Several weeks passed, and the father began to get better. And so the mother called the doctors, and they came and looked and said, your husband is healed. He has no cancer. And so Brother Yun says to his mother, well, how can I learn about this man Jesus? And she said, well, there's nobody around anymore that's teaching about Jesus. The missionaries left when the revolution came. So Brother Yun began to pray. And he prayed, and he asked Jesus, he said, how can I learn about you? And the mother said, the missionaries had a Bible. So he said, maybe I can pray for a Bible. And so he began to pray as a 16-year-old, God, give me a Bible. 2 weeks passed, a knock came at the door in the middle of the night, and it was 2 Chinese men. And they had a brown paper bag with them, and they had a Bible in it. And they said, somebody in this house is praying for a Bible. And we had brought a Bible, we had to dig it up. And we can only leave it with you for a little while. But we want you to have it. So they took the Bible, and Brother Yun read it from cover to cover, and he began to memorize it. This is the most fabulous story. And I always give this away to my students at different times, and if there's anybody that would like to read this, if you even have time, I would be glad to leave this copy with you, because it's an incredible story. And it emphasizes the fact that Brother Yun, as a child or a teenager, learned from his mother, who at one time as a child heard about prayer. Now let's look just very, very quickly at this, let's see, the handouts that I've given you. And time is getting by, and I don't have time to go over it all, but once again, these are handouts that you can take home and learn from some specific ways that you can work with your children. I'm going to leave this handout with you, but I want to share with you one particular story that impressed me from one of the professors. He lived in a very poor country across the border in Mexico, and as a child growing up, he had very little material possessions. And he didn't even have any shoes to wear. And the ones that he did have were falling apart and ragged. And so one day his mother called him and said, and this is a true story, he said, take this money and go to the store and get these groceries for me. Here's the list. And so he went to the store. But before he went to the store, he said, Mom, well, could I have some money for shoes? He was 5 years old. And the mom said, honey, we don't have any money for shoes, but let's pray that God will give us money for shoes. So they went outside and they kneeled beside a tree, and they prayed, God, please provide shoes for my son. He went to the store, handed the grocer the money. The grocer just looked over and said, why don't you have any shoes on? And he said, because we don't have any money for shoes. The grocer filled the order, gave him the food to take home, and then he gave an envelope and he said, take this money to your mother. This is money for your shoes. Took the money home, and they went and bought the shoes. And when anybody saw him with shoes and said, where did you get those new fancy shoes? He said, God gave me the shoes. Now I'm going to leave you with this handout also, because this handout tells of faculty members at Southwestern Seminary who had parents who taught them to pray. Because what we want to know is, how do parents teach us to pray? Some of the things that these professors said, Mother was a prayer warrior. I remember we prayed after reading the Bible. We prayed before meals. We prayed before bedtime. Mother prayed for missionaries. Another one said prayer was the only means of survival for our family under communist rule. We prayed as a family together. We had a prayer list. Now what I'm doing is giving you things that you can do to teach your children about prayer. We wrote in a book prayers that we had and the date that that prayer was answered. We wrote the names of missionaries and put them in specific places around our house, because we knew that they were going to have a birthday this week. We prayed before going on a trip. We learned that we could pray anytime and anywhere. We also learned that we did not have to close our eyes when we prayed. And over these different faculty members would say, I remember waking up and seeing my father on his knees in prayer, or my mother on her knees in prayer. So I'll hand this out to you also. Now, what I'd like for us to do is close our session tonight, the next 20 minutes, with another one of the Crown Ministry videos. Go ahead, Laura. And what this is going to show you is that God asks one thing from us, and that's obedience. And you mentioned it tonight. And we're going to look at the patriarch, Abraham. And you know the story. But think about, this is what God calls us to do. And if we will just obey and attempt to learn about prayer ourselves, just begin praying at meal times and then praying for our children and teaching them about prayer.